Stop right there, clearly obvious villain that is written to make us believe that there's actually a very convoluted clash of ideologies so that you can actually view the bad guys as kind of good guys and us, the good guys, as bad guys, but the writing wasn't that on par. So it actually just makes it so we're the good guys and you're the bad guy. So cease now before the writing just kind of sputters out and just kind of gets rushed and doesn't really resolve a bunch of stuff, and then we just kind of get a half-baked conclusion. You fool! You may have had many training arcs up until this point, but I can steal your Bankai and I know all of your moves. Oh, also, I have about 3 phases you'll have to get through. But don't worry, I'll make it look like you crushed me each time. Hell, you guys will even die for real sometimes, but I wouldn't worry too much about it because you'll probably get brought back with no real explanation or very minimal. I mean, to be honest, we side characters as the villains have way cooler fights. So, I mean, you're welcome. Also, our fights on the side will actually probably be way more fleshed out and interesting than the main villain. I mean, our leader. So what do you have to say for yourself, pathetic Soul Reaper? Bankai! Wait, no! Oh no! Oh God, I can't believe you beat me. The power of friendship or something. I don't know. God, oh. And you were doing so well. Those first 3 arcs? So good. That 4th arc though? What happened? Oh. Couldn't stick the landing? I mean, actually, probably did stick the landing. It was just with your face. If you or anyone you've known has been a victim to a bad ending in an otherwise great anime or manga series, then... wait. I sound like one of those, like, tearjerk commercials. Like, I should have Angel by Sarah McLachlan and, like, sad puppies around me. Hi, I'm the Florida Animan. And if you, a loved one, or anyone you may know has been a victim to poor writing or a bad ending in an otherwise great manga or anime series, please feel free to dial the number below. We'll try to help you as best as possible, but not really. We all have to suffer through it. I'm sorry, but I thank you for your time. Please hit that subscription so you may suffer with us together. So I've probably made it super obvious at this point that today's video I would like to talk about Bleach. I have recently finished the entire manga, which includes what hasn't been adapted yet, and I just want to kind of go through the ups and downs, what's good, what's bad, and boy, there's a lot of both. Primarily, the ending of this series is rough. I think it's bad. I think anybody that says it isn't bad is kind of just wrong. You're allowed to have your opinion and your taste, but just the writing is so poor that I think it's still wrong. But good on you if you're able to kind of grit through it. Otherwise, pretty good story. A lot of great characters. A lot of good build up and setup for stuff. And just creativity with fights. But boy, oh boy, does that writing get real bad towards the end. So let's strap in. Get them Zanpakutos. Gather up all that reishi. Find your best Soul Reaper buddies. Throw in that soul capsule pill or whatever they call it at this point. And get ready, because we're going to talk about Bleach. So to start with the goods, essentially, probably the most important thing, because reading the manga, if this isn't good, then you're probably not going to stick around too long, even if the writing is phenomenal. The art for Bleach, oh, it looks so good. It's just sheer, just, it's not super detailed, but it's just detailed enough to just kind of flesh out every scene that happens in every panel. So much so that like the fights that happen in this series in that still motion for a manga are awesome. You can feel the blows and the directions of the stabs and slashes, and every just hit kind of feels like it matters. This isn't Boruto where someone can get punched this way and go flying that way. So it's just very engaging, and honestly, it's nice to look at. That's probably the most important part when it comes to manga. So good thing it got that. Even at the end, even towards the end when the writing gets poor, the art is still consistent. And it does change a little bit from the beginning to the end, but like kind of subtly as it goes on, so it's not jarring to look at. That's definitely one of the best parts of it. I didn't fully watch the anime, but I do watch fights and all the openings and endings of stuff I read if it is adapted already. And the soundtrack, oh, also good. So good. There are so many different tracks that you can just throw on the side while you're doing something and just jam out to it. They have like the sad stare out the window and play the lo-fi like watching the rain, and then they have that fighting music that's just like pumps you up and you just want to like throw down yourself. The character design and the weapons for like the zanpakutos and katanas essentially are so creative. That might honestly be my personal favorite part, and what kind of attracted me so much is everybody has like their gimmick, but nobody feels like one track where they're that one trait for a personality and that's it. There's a lot of development and growth for characters in this series, but just look-wise, everybody looks very distinct if they're like a named character, at least for the most part. Sure, there are probably some side characters that just kind of get thrown by the wayside, but every main character, and there's a lot, which is almost a good and bad thing, but I'll get into that. Everybody, you'll remember their names for the most part by the end because they all stand out and have these unique traits, and then their fighting style or what their sword's ability is. It is so cool. It makes most of the fights when people square off more of like this interesting dynamic of intelligence and having to think around another person's abilities and how it can benefit you or how you can work around it. And it's just that like, it's that dynamic of having to think on the fly while also doing like giant big blows. It's not just two people just blasting each other over and over again blindly. There's this methodical approach to it that makes it super engaging. And even as the series goes on, which I kind of felt like it was doing at the beginning with everybody having like just one ability and that's it, everybody, even people that kind of do the same thing a couple times in a row, will eventually just like switch it up and have that same move but with a twist on it, so it kind of grows. Even people's like actual abilities seem to grow with the characters, and that is super interesting. I absolutely loved that. This is just like, it just makes for a very engaging and easy to root for cast of characters when they're cool to look at, they're interesting to follow even without backstories, and they do, most of them have like, they get like the little snippet of a backstory to kind of flesh them out, but there are so many characters that, I mean, if they did that, we'd be here for 20 volumes just trying to get to know everyone. The story itself in the very beginning and all the way up until probably like 50% or 75% of the way in, even into the final arc, is actually very engaging and very interesting. They set up very clear rules and kind of just how the world works and how different enemies work between Soul Reapers, humans, hollows, and beyond. And it's just simple enough to be grounded, so it sets these rules up and you can just kind of follow them and not be too confused. And when people pull moves and ridiculous stuff, it doesn't feel like a total ass pull, which makes for a very enjoyable experience when you're not constantly going, which I will give for this series. Most of the fighting and techniques are believable. While like some can get just on an otherworldly scale, they're not out of the realm of possibility created in this storyline. So even when somebody like summons a million blades and just like brings down the heavens on someone, you're like, well, yeah, I mean, that's just kind of how everything works in this. But it doesn't become that, it doesn't just devolve into that constantly. So I think the overall story is enjoyable up until a point where it does start falling apart because there's way too many questions to be answered, and a lot don't even actually get answered, and resolutions and whatnot. Now this is sort of where we cross the line from the good stuff to the bad stuff, and I say we're right on the line because a really great part of this is the side fights are amazing in this series. The bad caveat with that is the main villain or final main fight or big bad that is being focused on, that's the leader of all those people in the side fights, is the least interesting part and the worst fight almost in every single season, where it's just fizzles out and it's this anticlimactic confrontation that's just kind of like, really? Like, I mean, it's better the earlier on because it didn't feel as rushed, but as it kind of gets through each one, it's just like, all right, well, there's all this build up and then it's way shorter than the main or the side characters. So it's a good and bad bit because the side fights are amazing. That's where the creativity really came out, with just clashing off two people. Now for truly getting into the bad part of this, and where I get ranty with a lot of stuff. The main villains, when they do lose, they will win a bunch of times for the most part against the good guys, just constantly whooping their ass. And then when it gets to the actual end of the arc, they just kind of lose. Like, it's just really lame. It's anticlimactic, and that's really all I have to say about that kind of stuff. Especially the actual ending of this feels like the biggest sinner of this, because it's just super painful to have like this super menacing, basically just unbeatable enemy that still at the end of the day is just like, oh, but like, no. And yeah, that's all I really have to say about the villains. When it comes to the overall cast and all the characters in this stories, there is a metric buttload in this series. My God. And while I did praise before in the good section how the designs and the mechanics of these characters and abilities works is really cool, there are so many characters that it's just way too many. It actually gets to the point where they kill off some people, and there's just so many that, I mean, it was either your favorite person or just kind of like, oh yeah, it was another one of them. And they give backstories to most characters in this series, except they're very brief for most characters just because there's so many. So it's not enough to really make you care. You'll kind of care, but then you'll move on and forget when they're trying to do it for everybody else. And then really there's the main character, Ichigo, that you want to root for and follow. And you, with the amount of characters and side fights and everything going on in this, Ichigo is probably in like half the series. I would actually like to know if somebody did the math on how long he's actually in the series and it follows him, because he begins to feel like a side character by the end of it, where he's like, everybody is relying on him and they need him to show up, but then they barely show him, or he's like recovering or gets in a fight and gets his ass kicked immediately or wins immediately. Like, it just goes like, he's so brief, and for the first half he's in it way more obviously, but by the end there's just, the cast is so big that it's just like he gets so much less screen time, and it's like, all right, well, am I like, is he the main protagonist, or is this kind of just everybody against the other side, where it's just this cast versus a evil cast? And I mean, yeah, I think it just needed to commit to a smaller cast of characters to flesh out way more and just make you care about this, rather than just throwing, like, every arc is just like, here's another 20 characters, half of them are probably gonna die. And like I said, most of them really are cool. I think most of the characters are cool in this series, but just, Jesus Christ, just dumb it down a little bit and focus more on the smaller amounts, and that would have been 10 times better. I mean, you have something that does it properly like One Piece, and probably what I love so much about the writing in One Piece is they can literally have like 2 full volumes on a backstory for a character you know has been dead for 20 years and isn't even in the story. It's just a story being told about that character for 2 volumes. And by the end of it, you're like, wait, it's ending? Like, I want to keep following that character. Because it just gets fleshed out so much and done so properly rather than just like be a boring subject to follow. It's made into this super interesting character. And I think that's just why One Piece is one of my all-time favorite mangas to begin with. But here it's just so brief. It's just commit. Just commit. Trim the fat and commit. While I do believe this series does follow a set of rules, my issue with the world building is it feels shallow. It feels just like they have the human world and the Soul Society and Hueco Mundo and like the kind of varying other places, but they don't really ever do anything past that. For the first half, it's all about like hollows and just like basically the undead and ghosts essentially. And by the second half, they're like non-existent. They like legitimately do not exist in the story at all. So it's just like, so those just aren't happening anymore. Like at least throw them in as part of the mechanic. There's all this build and world creation for certain things that just kind of get thrown away after a certain point. Even full-on mechanics. Like about halfway through, they have like the Fullbring arc, which is a mini main arc. It's still a pretty big arc, but it's probably the smallest one out of all of them, that introduces like an entire mechanic of like using an item that your soul is bonded to as a weapon or as some form of ability, and that really only is used by a couple people and very briefly, and then past when that arc happens it's just kind of totally forgotten, except in like brief instances where it's kind of like just thrown in there to be like, oh, we remember this, but not really. So it's just kind of thrown in just to make it seem like they remember. But yeah, I would have liked to see something build off of that. This series, for its training arcs, good God, I feel like someone's always training in this series. People will literally be training in the middle of a fight practically. There will be a training arc and then they will go into a fight, get their ass kicked after all that training, making it useless, and then before that fight is actually over, have an inner training arc where they're like, no, but like I've come to terms with this power, and get stronger and win the fight they just lost immediately after. Or jump into a fight after training and then get their butt kicked, go back to doing more training, and then come back and get their butt kicked again, and then go do more training, and then come back and maybe finally win, if not do more training. It is ridiculous. It's just like, how many times are we gonna have people that just do all this training and then lose anyway? Because it's just like, I get it, like failure is always a thing, but it's just like, my God, do it a little bit differently. It became that so many times that that's why I noticed it. And I don't want to dunk on Ichigo as a character too hard, but at some point I do have to, because how do I even put this? Ichigo as a character is interesting enough, but like his growth and development is very 50-50. I think he grows as a character primarily in strength and fighting style, where he actually gets better and like adapts and learns from his mistakes, kind of. It's more just in strength, maybe not off of mistakes. And the reason I say that is because he does grow and learn to like come to terms with certain inner conflict and whatnot, and blaming himself for certain instances and not being able to like help everybody that needs it. And I do appreciate that he does have that growth. But why I say this is because towards the end, when he is facing off against the final people of this series, he goes back to doing the same shit he literally started the series doing, of just being either overconfident or just getting easily angered and just swinging and seeing if he can just chop them down as hard as possible. And it's just like, really? What was the point of all this growth that he does have kind of in the middle and learns from these mistakes and grows as a person, to just doing the exact same shit that didn't work the first time? And it's just really frustrating, because it's like, well, they definitely just kind of were like, we just need to finish this series. Because he legitimately, on that final fight, if he didn't have help, he probably wouldn't have won. And it's just, they created him as this character where by the halfway mark and on, they made it so everybody's like, we need Ichigo, he needs to be here to save us. But then he ends up not being able to do anything half the time, or the bad guy gets to where he needs to go because of Ichigo with this backtracking. And that's a whole different issue where he'll just be in one area and then he'll travel through, but the bad guy couldn't get back to where he just came from until he came down. So it was just like, if he had just not come down during this whole conflict to help everybody, then this whole issue would have, it just, oh, the writing got so sloppy by the end that it's just like, I don't even know. Like, does any of this even make sense? Am I even valid in any of these points? I feel like I am for the most part, but maybe I'm just jaded at this point because I'm coming off of it fresh, and just, I just can't defend it. Especially this ending where it's so sloppy. I mean, it's all over the place. So much stuff doesn't get resolved, and while a lot of stuff, the early questions do get resolved, it's just kind of has characters that are killed off screen or on screen, and then they either just come back or they're just not shown ever again. Like, some characters will literally look like they get blasted and die. Like, actually die, not like, oh, maybe they're dead, but then they'll just be like in the final like chapters just like, oh yeah, no, we're good. But then they'll have other characters that had like this huge like trauma happen to them, and then it's just like, well, what happened to them? Like, it just doesn't resolve. 50% of the stuff is like, what happened to these characters? They just tie everything together and they're like, all right, get your ship who your characters are and let's just kind of roll it out. And even that's like really weak. So unfortunately, that's just a product of the writing, I guess. It's just all over the place, unresolved, and just a mess. It had so much potential, and it's tough love. I have to just... I think that's enough for the rant for today. At least they do wrap it up, so you get your ships, so you can see who won the waifu wars. I completely understand why it ended up with who it ended up with, but I would not be surprised if there was a huge fan base of people that wanted a different one that you would also think would be quite just as obvious. However, just to be clear, my own personal picks, I don't know, it's kind of a toss-up. I'm more of a Nell and Yoruichi guy. Those were just my two best girls for sure. It wasn't even a contest. But yeah, that's all I really wanted to talk about for today. Hopefully you enjoyed this video. Hopefully it didn't just sound like me complaining for 20 minutes or so, or however long this video ends up being, because I actually still recommend that you read this series, because I am always in the mindset that do not form an opinion on something until you've experienced it yourself. Don't just take what somebody says and treat that like the Bible. Look at things through your own point of view and see how you feel about it. But it is still a rough ending, and just, it's unfortunate. I'm sad to see it, but give it a shot if you haven't already. I've finally finished the big three, so I've like created the foundation. I've finally like solidified it. So now I have the opinion and the know well how of what those consist of, and kind of how Shonen has branched off of those. But otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, leave a like on it. Subscribe if you haven't already. If you're still here and you're not subscribed, what is wrong with you? I mean, why would you watch this entire thing and not be subscribed at this point? These some chunky boys. These some long boys on some boring talking, for the most part. I mean, maybe it's not entirely boring, but I'm rambling. So, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace!